looking forward to just our celebration of Christmas next Sunday, and all the decorations that maybe are up at your house, or you're just getting those done, or they've been up for a long time, some of you, since Halloween or whatever. And we're excited about that. Have you ever heard of a Jesse tree? Have you ever done that? Some denominations, spiritual backgrounds are more in tune with this than others, but a Jesse tree is essentially a Christmas tree that has decorations that refer to either they're just the name of the person, or they might be a symbol that relates to the story of the name of the person in Jesus' family tree. You can read that genealogy in Matthew chapter 1, and there's all sorts of folks listed there, and so a Jesse tree has those names used as decorations for the Christmas tree. I read a story this week about a young pastor who was getting involved in a prison ministry. This nun, Sister Rose, called him one day and asked him to participate in this Bible study at the New Jersey State Penitentiary. And so he agreed, and he got involved with this, and he headed out. And one of the first weeks he was there, it was around Christmas time, and he walked into the room, and there was this room that some of the inmates had set up already that were participating in the Bible study, and they had metal folding chairs set in a circle with a paperback Bible on each one of the chairs, and they were getting ready to go. And Sister Rose said to this young preacher, she said, "I thought what we could do is, over the next several weeks, we could decorate a Jesse tree. And so today, I'm going to have some folks choose an ornament, and we'll do 3 ornaments, and we'll just put them up, and when the individual chooses the ornament and hangs it on the tree, then they can tell us a little something about that person involved in Jesus' family tree." And so the young preacher said, "That sounds like that would be fine." And Sister Rose called the meeting to order, said, "Can I have a volunteer? We're going to decorate the Jesse tree. We're going to do 3 ornaments today. I just need somebody to go first." Inmate's arm shot up, said, "I'll go." And he went up to the basket with the ornaments, and he reached in, and he pulled out the ornament, and he said, "It says Ruth." And Sister Rose said, "Well, tell us a little something about Ruth." And he said, "Well, I didn't. My church doesn't teach the Bible, and I don't know any Ruth." And she said, "Well, we have an issue because we can't read the whole book of Ruth this morning." And she's looking around for answers. She said, "Well, Pastor Jason, why don't you just fill us in on Ruth?" And so this young pastor writes that he sat up, silently praising God that the inmate hadn't pulled the ornament labeled Abijah. And he said, "Well, Ruth is the grandmother of Jesse, so that's King David's great-grandmother. She was a Gentile, actually a Moabite." "A what?" the inmate asked. "A Moabite. Ruth was from Moab." "Mo what?" he asked again. "Moab. It's where Jordan is today. It means from dad." "From dad," the inmate said. "That's a dumb name." "Well, it's named after the son of Lot," I explained. The pastor explained. "After God destroyed Sodom, Lot and the 2 daughters hid in a cave. 9 months later, Lot's oldest daughter gave birth to Lot's son. She named him Moab, from dad." "Dang," the inmate said. "He should be in here with us." Looking quickly to move on, Sister Rose said, "Can I have another volunteer?" And another gentleman volunteered, and he went up and he pulled out an ornament, and he said, "It says tumor." "I think you mean Tamar," Sister Rose corrected him. Tamar. "Well, who's he?" "It's a she," Sister Rose corrected again, and perhaps sensing that there was not going to be a lot of information from this particular individual about Tamar, she said, "Preacher, why don't you tell us a little bit about Tamar as well?" And the preacher said, "Well, Tamar is the daughter-in-law of Judah, Jacob's son." And the inmate said, "And what?" the preacher asked. "Well, you're not giving much of a story. The name isn't really much of a story." And so the preacher said, he bit his lip and pressed ahead. "Okay, so she's Judah's daughter-in-law, but Judah's son is dead. She's a widow. Her husband has been struck down by the Lord for practicing..." "Well, never mind. Anyway, she disguised herself as a prostitute and slept with her father-in-law. When Judah hears that Tamar had prostituted herself, he orders that she be put to death. Only at the last minute, Judah discovers that he had been Tamar's client and that her baby Perez was his son." Matthew mentions him in Jesus' family tree as well. "They all stared at the preacher silently for a couple beats, not sure if he had just concocted a wild story. Desperate to rescue the moment, Sister Rose said, "Why don't we all sing Away in the Manger?" One of the inmates reminded her, "No, you said 3 ornaments, and so we're supposed to do 3 ornaments." And she said, "Okay, yeah, I need one more volunteer." Volunteer came forward, and he chose an ornament, and he said, "Abraham." Sister Rose sort of sighed a great relief. You know, this run-of-the-mill Bible name. We can't get into much trouble with Abraham. She said, "Surely some of you know about Father Abraham." The inmate said, "Yeah, absolutely. He's the one who passed off his old lady as his sister, had a kid with a slave girl, and would have slit his son's throat if an angel of the Lord hadn't stopped him." "Man," the inmate said, "I thought my family was messed up. JC's family is jacked up." I think we can agree that there's a lot of dysfunction in Jesus' family tree. That, Jesus' family tree, probably a little bit like our family tree, is kind of jacked up. There's some issues there. Jesus came from sinners for sinners. But man, there was something radically different about Jesus. He's God entering our world, putting skin on. And though he came from that line of sinners, he lived a perfect life, ending as a perfect sacrifice, and rose from the dead 3 days later. Now we can absolutely hope in Jesus. In Isaiah chapter 11, the first 10 verses, we get kind of a different picture of Jesus' family tree. We get a different picture of a tree. It uses a tree, actually a stump of a tree, to describe Jesus entering the world and the kingdom that he'll advance. And I think that in this 10 verses in Isaiah chapter 11, we learn 3 expectations, three ways that Jesus exceeds all of our expectations. 3 expectations that Jesus meets and exceeds in Isaiah chapter 11. I'm going to take a look at the first 10 verses. I'm going to read those for us this morning. If you have your Bibles, I'd love for you to join me in Isaiah chapter 11. This is what God's word says. "There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his root shall bear fruit. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide disputes by what his ears hear. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fattened calf together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the adder's den, that's viper's den. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. And that day the root of Jesse, who shall stand as a signal for the peoples, of him shall the nations inquire, and his resting place shall be glorious." An interesting section of Scripture, these 3 expectations. The first expectation is that he lives. He's alive. Jesus lives. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. So it's kind of a weird, interesting beginning of our study this morning, and this description of this tree stump. And I think it'll help if we put this in a little bit of context. So let's go back just to chapter 10. And you maybe have remembered as we have walked through a couple of passages in Isaiah already, we've been talking about this divided kingdom, the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah. We know that Isaiah is prophesying, he's preaching, he's ministering in that southern kingdom, and we've seen some kings kind of get in trouble in the southern kingdom of Judah. And you maybe remember last week that Ahaz was concerned about the invading armies really all around, but especially from the north with Israel and Syria. And so he makes kind of this foolish, selfish decision to form an alliance with the real world power of Assyria. And he says, this is going to solve it. And God said, you shouldn't do this, don't do this, because I'm going to use Assyria not only to judge Israel, but I'm going to use Assyria to judge Judah, and eventually Babylon will sweep God's people away from Judah. And so Assyria is sort of the world power at the moment. They're the big dogs on the block. And we get to chapter 10 of Isaiah, verse 5. It says, "Ah, Assyria, the rod of my anger, the staff in their hands is my fury." Now that little word "ah," some of your translations might have the English word "woe." It's that same Hebrew word. A couple weeks ago we talked about that little word "woe." And when you read "woe," most of the time, often anyway, you need to think God's judgment when you read that little word "woe." And here God is saying, look, I know Assyria's the world power. I know they're the dominant force at the moment. I know that I'm even going to use them to judge my people in Israel and Judah. But make no mistake, God says, I will judge them as well. And we get to the end of chapter 10. It says, he will cut down the thickets of the forest with an axe, and Lebanon will fall by the majestic one. That God is going to judge them all, and he's going to cut down all the proud. Right? Whoever is prideful, if it's his own people being filled with pride and seeking their own selfish desires, or if it's the nation of Assyria who he is using as a force of judgment at the moment, when they're a little too full of themselves, cut down the tree as well. And we're left with this picture of just this sort of forest of tree stumps. Right? Everyone's cut down. In verse 11, there shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse. Have you ever had a tree stump in your yard? You know, what do we know about tree stumps? Well, we know that tree stump, it really is much larger than what we see kind of peeking up above the earth, right? You know, if you've ever had a tree stump, and most people when they have a tree stump, they think, how can I get rid of this tree stump? And maybe they thought, well, this isn't too big in diameter. It's not that big a tree, and there's a stump here. I'm going to dig this stump out of my yard. And then they started digging, and they kept digging. And like 3 weeks later, they realized, I can't dig this thing up. It's too big. And if I can dig it up, it's way too big for me to manage and haul off on my own. It's just, tree stumps are much larger and heavier than they appear. They're really hard to get rid of. They attract all kinds of varmints, especially insects and termites, and that's why we have this desire to get rid of them. You know, they attract all these bad things. If you just leave them there and you think, well, I kind of like it, and I'll just put it here, and eventually Mother Nature will take care of the tree stump, that tree stump can remain for decades in that place. Really, your only hope is if maybe there's this new life that can spring from it. You've maybe seen this too. That's what's being described here, this shoot, this sprig of life that grows out of this stump. It's described here as the stump of Jesse. Well, we just heard from Sister Rose that Jesse is King David's father. And so we're talking about the Davidic line, this family tree of David. By the time you get to Jesus being born, in Luke chapter 2, verse 4, we know Jesus is from the line of David. By the time you get to that point, there's been 600 years. 600 years since anyone from David's line has sat on the throne. Since anyone from David's line has influenced and had any influence, any power, any authority. And so this new king that's being described here in Isaiah chapter 11, this new sprig of life, this shoot from the stump of Jesse, man, David's line, that kingdom, there's no better way to describe it than as a stump. It's laid dormant for 600 years. And Jesus will enter this world and bring a new life. We know that about this stump of Jesse, that Jesse was David's father, and so that talks about and ought to remind us of the humble beginnings of Jesus, the humble nature of Jesus' birth. Before King David kind of led Israel to its heyday, he was Jesse's son. So it reminds us not only of Jesus' humility and the humble nature of his birth, but it also reminds us of the fact that no other king in Israel had been called the son of Jesse but King David, because David was the glory days. And so every king after him was called the son of David. So Jesus not only comes from David's line, he not only follows in David's line, but he reaches back before David. He predates David at the same time. This shoot is both a part of the old tree and a brand new tree all at once. You've maybe seen that happen in an old tree stump, and how this new tree kind of grows from that old tree, but it's growing beside it as well. It's both attached and all new at the same time. This branch will bring forth and shall bear fruit, Isaiah said. Well, Jesus enters this world, and man, did Jesus' ministry bear fruit. Think about the different ways that Jesus accomplished this. He built, first were relationships that Jesus built. He spends 3 years in ministry essentially grooming, essentially discipling these 12 guys that were closest to him. So everywhere he goes, they go. He's building relationships with these 12 friends closest to him, his disciples. But it's not just those 12 disciples. Jesus is reaching into the world and reaching folks like the tax collector, Zechariah, folks that nobody, Zacchaeus, folks that nobody would think to talk to. He's speaking with the woman at the well. He's building these relationships with Mary and Martha and reaching into places where no one else, with the very least of these, no one else would go. He not only is building relationships, but he's taking care of people physically, spiritually, and emotionally. You don't have to go far in the Gospels to read about Jesus healing somebody from some ailment. You can think about the feeding of the 5,000 and how Jesus takes care of folks physically. Again, you go to the story of the woman at the well, and it's easy to see how Jesus reaches in and heals the emotional and spiritual hurts of people that he encountered. There was much fruit from Jesus' ministry in those 3 years. And then you get to the culmination of that ministry, his sacrifice, his death on the cross, and his resurrection on the third day. And his ministry continues to bear fruit today through the life of his followers, through his church. Just take a look at some of the things going on, even here at this little church Wallula, and how he continues to bear fruit. That you can stay connected to him in both corporate and personal worship, that you can reach out and supply the needs of others through maybe this a walk to the manger offering, or through serving at the Shelter of Hope, or the Third Thursday, or I saw folks coming to distribute backpack buddies this week. All kinds of different ways that the followers of Jesus continue to reach out and provide for the physical, spiritual, and emotional needs of people in this world. And we can share that story of Jesus. We can continue to bear fruit in that way as well. On your chairs, there were these Christmas invitations. I'd sure encourage you to take those and just use those to invite someone to our Christmas Eve services. I know I'm going to have some with me all week. And I'm just praying that God brings about opportunities, and I know he will. All right, I bet if you ask God for an opportunity to share an invitation with somebody this week to come and worship with you at Christmas Eve, he will provide that opportunity. And so I'd encourage you to grab those Christmas Eve invitations and just use those this week to share the chance to hear about Jesus here at Wallula. The first expectation is that he lives. He continues to be at work today. The second expectation is that he is able. He's able to accomplish all of this. Let's take a look at verses 2 through 5 here. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide disputes by what his ears hear. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. We get this description of Jesus being in the Spirit. But He's in the Spirit like no one else is. He exercises in the Spirit in this perfect way. It's this amazing description. I was chatting with a buddy of mine, and his son wrestles in high school, and I was talking about high school wrestling, and my son wrestled when he was in high school, and I came to that sport not knowing anything about it. You know, when somebody said wrestling, I thought, Hulk Hogan from the top ring rope. That's what I thought of, and so I didn't have really any knowledge about that sport, and came to enjoy it. But one of the things that stood out to me in high school wrestling anyway is that athletes are divided into weight class. But not everybody, even in that same weight class, is in the same class. There were occasions when two athletes would come to the wrestling mat, and you would look at one athlete and you think, man, that guy is a grown man. And the other athlete would come to the mat and you'd think, I will be praying for him. Right? You knew just by, I didn't have any knowledge of the sport. I didn't have any reason to think. I didn't know the technique or anybody's ability level. But there were occasions just looking at the two individuals, okay, that kid's going to win, and we hope he doesn't break anything on this one. You just knew, you could tell the difference. Well, hear this description of Jesus as this leader covered, resting in God's Spirit. Man, there is just something not physically different, but spiritually different about him. Take a look at this amazing description. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. You count all those up, and I know I'm a preacher, but I think when you count up all those descriptions, there's 7 different ways that God's Spirit is described as resting on this new king, on Messiah, on Jesus. What do we know about the number 7 in Scripture? Well, you've probably heard somebody say the number 7, that's the perfect number. That's the Lord's number. Right? And so when you read the number 7, you think perfection. That's a hard idea for me to understand. I struggle with the idea of perfection. Maybe a better way to think about that is fullness or being complete. Jesus is absolutely, fully, he's completed. He's all wrapped up. He exercises every conversation, every decision, every choice in the Spirit of the Lord. Isaiah goes on to describe it like this: "In his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord." His delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. On occasion, I'll go to this fancy chicken restaurant, and I'll go into the fancy chicken restaurant, and I might want a refill on my Diet Coke. And so you take the Diet Coke up to get a refill, and you ask for a refill, and in the fancy chicken restaurant, they say, "It would be my pleasure." That's my pleasure. Now, sometimes when that person at the fancy chicken restaurant tells me that it's my pleasure, I believe them. And sometimes I don't. Right? And I understand. I wouldn't want to trade places with them necessarily. I mean, how many wackos have come up there begging for a refill on Diet Coke? I get it, that it's not always really their pleasure. Here, walking in the fear of the Lord, always doing the will of the Lord, always being connected, following, obeying absolutely, is described as his delight. I don't know if you think about your own life, and I think about the times when I feel like I've been in the will of the Lord and times when I haven't, and even some of the times when I think I'm obeying and I'm doing the right thing, I might not describe that as my delight, as my pleasure. But it is. That Hebrew word here, it's a Hebrew word that it's often used in the Old Testament, but it's not often translated as delight. Most often it's translated as spirit. It's the idea of God's Spirit at work in the world, this force that is working through his people and through his creation to bring about his will. If you turn back to the very beginning in Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, you'll remember this verse, that God's Spirit, the Lord's Spirit, hovered over creation. It's the same Hebrew word, ruach. This idea, this connection between the spiritual and the physical. This connection between heaven and earth. It's how God from heaven works in his creation. And here this new king, it's his delight to walk in the fear of the Lord. It's his ruach to be present with us. It's this bridge like none other that connects this world, this physical creation, to heaven, to the spiritual world. Jesus makes that connection in ways bigger and better than anything before. And so he delights in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see or decide disputes by what his ears hear, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Now Jesus is absolutely coming in judgment, but kind of lost in the English translation here. When you go back and you study how Jesus judges the poor, when God judges the poor, that's almost always a synonym for salvation. That Jesus makes a way for the meek to inherit the earth. That Jesus makes a way to rescue those in need. And so absolutely, Jesus is coming in judgment, but that judgment is perfect. Isaiah says it won't be with eyes that he sees or ears that he hears. What does he mean by that? Well, he means Jesus warns us to not judge others, because we tend to do that with what we see and what we hear, what we know from our vantage point. But Jesus is perfect. He's judging from God's vantage point. You guys watched the Chiefs game last week? There's that one play at the end of the game. I mean, if you watch, you know the play I'm talking about. They're driving down to score the go-ahead touchdown, and Patrick Mahomes throws a pass to Travis Kelce in the middle field. Kelce turns to run upfield, and you think, no matter what happens here, this is going to be a good thing. And then Kelce turns and he laterals. He throws a perfect spiral backwards to a wide receiver dashing down the field. Now, as he does this, a defender kind of flashes in front of him on the screen. And if you're anything like me, you were thinking, no, until the wide receiver catches it and runs into the end zone, and you think, yes, that's just what I would have done. Great play. And then there was a flag, a penalty. And they called offsides on that same wide receiver who had just scored the touchdown. He had lined up over the line of scrimmage. Offsides. I saw a stat this week that Andy Reid has coached, 10,000s of plays, whatever the number was. It was thousands and thousands of football plays, and that was the first time in any of those plays that offensive offsides had been called on an Andy Reid coach team. It just doesn't happen very much. And so there were pictures showing up online after this, right away and all week long, and depending on the camera angle, the person would say, no, he wasn't offsides, or he was just a little bit offsides, and they never call this. Or a different camera angle, and they were like, yeah, he was 3 yards offsides. They have to call that. And it all depended on the angle of the camera. Right? That's why Jesus warns us not to judge others, because we tend to do it from our vantage point, from the angle we have perspective on, and maybe we lose sight of kind of the bigger picture. We certainly don't have a heavenly perspective very often on things. And Jesus here says, Isaiah says that Jesus, this new king, will judge in perfection. He sees everything from this heavenly vantage point. He is absolutely able and capable of judging perfectly and rescuing those who are in need of rescuing. The second expectation is that he is able. Third expectation is that he restores all. There's this fascinating description of what most people say is what life will be like on earth when Jesus returns. It says the wolf in verse 6 shall dwell with the lamb, And the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion, the fattened calf together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the viper's den. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the water covers the sea. In that day the root of Jesse, who shall stand as a signal for the people, of him shall the nations inquire, and his resting place shall be glorious. Now people say this is what earth will be like when Jesus returns, because we look around and we know one thing: this is not what earth is like right now. Right? We talk about, this passage in Scripture, when the lion lays down with the lamb, it's actually the wolf. We just kind of smush these two together, but it's the same idea, isn't it? Like when this predator will lay down beside his prey. When these two enemies will not be in conflict anymore, but there'll be this perfect peace, this restoration of what it was like. And Genesis chapter 1, verses 29 and 30 talks about God giving all the plants to the animals to eat. And so some people say, well, before the flood, everyone was a vegetarian. And when Jesus returns, everyone will be a vegetarian. I don't know how I feel about that. But I know when Jesus comes, I won't care. Right? Because whether there is an actual lamb lying down with an actual wolf, or whether the fattened calf doesn't worry about the lion, his creation will be restored to perfection. This peace that passes understanding will be all that we know. The prophet Ezekiel talked about the same thing, that cities that are decimated will be restored just like they were before, just like God's creation in Eden. When Adam and Eve walked in the very presence of God. When it was safe, and when it will be safe enough for, I don't know why you would do this, but when it will be safe enough for your little kids to go play with venomous snakes. You know, we get this idea about the good old days. I was thinking about this. What's the correlation? How do I describe this? And I thought about riding my bike to school. I have a picture of this old bike. My dad brought this home. He said, here's your bike. And I learned to ride on a bike like this. Mine was red, not yellow, but it looked pretty much like this. It had fenders over the tires and this banana seat and these curved handlebars. And Dad brought it home, and I thought, this is not what I want at all. I was like, Dad, nobody has fenders on their bike tires. And my dad said, well, when I was a kid, only rich people had fenders on your tires, so you're going to ride this bike and you like it. And so I did. And I liked it just fine. I rode that bike to school. Now, we lived, 3 or 4 miles away from school. In 3rd grade, I rode my bike to school on occasion. I can't imagine sending my 3rd grader to ride like down the block to school, but 3 miles? Have a safe trip. No helmet. We didn't worry about any of that stuff, right? And I don't know if it was just safer then, or we were less afraid, or we thought it was safer, or we didn't have as much information. I don't know. We tend to think about the good old days, and if we're really honest, the good old days weren't all that good. They weren't all that different. What I do know is that when Jesus returns, man, it will be absolute perfection, everything restored. The bodies that are breaking down to disease, restored to eternity, to health. And it all happens because of a relationship with Jesus. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, verse 9 says, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord. As the water covers the sea, everyone will know me. In that day, the root of Jesse, who shall stand as a signal for the peoples, of him shall the nations inquire, and his resting place shall be glorious. Because of Jesus' death and resurrection, because we have this chance to know him and be in relationship with him, we can be made all new. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 17 says, therefore if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. restored, transformed. And yes, we are in a now, not yet situation. We are growing into that glorified form that someday we will be in the presence of Jesus. And everything will be restored. We can begin that relationship right now. And so that broken relationship can be restored. God can reach in and fix the hurt in your life right now. He's made a way for you to know Him forever and ever and ever. We didn't have a Jesse tree growing up, but every year we would go into our pasture. My folks live on 40 acres outside of Topeka, and we often, when I was a little older, I'd go into the pasture and we'd find a tree and cut it down and drag it home. And we'd have to put it in a bucket of water because my mom said you put it in a bucket of water so it'll green up. Right? And it seemed like forever that it sat in that bucket of water until she was, I think, finally ready for us to decorate or whatever. And so then we would do that. And we always cut down these cedar trees in the pasture. And if you know anything about cedar trees, you know that they're more bush than tree. They're not the perfect manicured Christmas tree you might get from the Christmas tree farm or whatever. They're bushy looking thing. You had to stick in a bucket of water and maybe the brown on the ends would turn a little more green, maybe not. And you'd finally set it up. But you threw enough tinsel on that sucker and you had yourself a Christmas tree. Man, it was really pretty. One of the things that sometimes people will criticize in churches, there'll be a cross on display somewhere. And man, there's never gnarly old wood cross. It's always shaped and stained beautifully. We wear golden crosses around our necks. And it really is a little bit odd. I get the criticism because that cross wasn't just some beautiful symbol. It was a device of execution. I mean, it would be like us wearing, an electric chair or a syringe around our necks. And we wouldn't really be into that. There was nothing beautiful about that tree that Jesus hung on. But man, the difference that sacrifice makes. 3 days later, the restoration, the resurrection that takes place, it changes everything. And it can make your Christmas beautiful forever. If you need to talk to somebody about beginning that relationship with Jesus, I'd love to have that conversation with you. I'd love to talk to you about what it means to say yes to Him in baptism. You can stop me on the way out and chat. If you just want to write the word baptism on that welcome home card, I'll get a hold of you this week and we'll have that conversation. Let's stand and worship Him right now.